Things in the NFC look like this at the moment. If the season ended today, Lions would have the 1 seed in the bye despite all those injuries on the defensive side of the ball. Falcons and Rams would be in as division winners from the South and West respectively. But those two divisions still up for grabs, and fan bases on the west coast of Florida and the Pacific Northwest are glad the season isn't ending today. Bucs and Seahawks at the moment need to leapfrog Atlanta and LA to get into the postseason. There's some other scenarios, of course, but let's get to Seattle on the road tonight in Chicago, taking on the Bears as road favorites. Gino Smith and company favored by 3.5 to stay alive in that division race. Maybe force that winner-take-all game with the Rams in Week 18. Bears, on the flip side, got trounced by the Lions last week at home, and it wasn't even close, folks. Seattle coming off back-to-back losses at home to the Packers and Vikings. So this is the path to the playoffs. Cardinals beating the Rams on Saturday, and then the Seahawks beating the Rams in Week 18. Now, there is a complicated scenario that if both the Seahawks and Rams win this week, it would come down to the 5th tiebreaker, even if Seattle wins in Week 18, in which the Rams would have quality victories over the Bills and Vikings to get them through. Back to the #1 overall pick. Caleb Williams in his last 9 games really mirrors what Chicago's gone through as a franchise. Good start. Boy, bad finish with the exception of a couple more regular season games left to go. All right, back here at DK and Dews. And Danny, you're our quarterback here. The question our producer wants to ask is if you could do a draft redo, would you still take Caleb Williams first overall? What's the answer?
You know, our producer, Noah, I got to give it to him because I know what he wants me to say. I wouldn't even draft Caleb Williams. He's been such a bust. Like, there's no way you could even touch him. I'm not going to fall for it, though. I'm not going to fall for it. Clearly have some other quarterbacks played and had better years, and you could argue Jaden Daniels, make a case for him athletically, what he's looked like upside. But you know what I would change if I could rewrite history? The Chicago Bears being allowed to take a quarterback #1 overall, the way they have been as dysfunctional as any franchise, ruining quarterbacks' careers, I think is borderline criminal. Caleb Williams, you know that's interesting about that stat we just put up there, the 9 games, which he's supposedly struggling. He still has 0 interceptions. Like, as bad as it's been, and as bad a situation as he's been in, with a head coach being fired, with a coordinator that looks maybe not ready for prime time, with a defense that's been atrocious, he still has played pretty well considering the adversity that he's been faced. So, no, I would not go ahead and take Jaden Daniels or Bo Nix or Drake May first overall if I could go back and redraft. I would do it the exact same way because what I want to look for is a quarterback ready. Like, is there any point where Caleb Williams has looked overwhelmed, unprepared, or incapable of being a franchise quarterback? No. And if you put Caleb Williams in Denver with Sean Payton, or you put him in Washington with Cliff Kingsbury, I would say maybe we would be talking about him for Rookie of the Year as opposed to those two. So I don't have any problem with the year that Caleb Williams had. If I was still there, I would redraft him. I would take him #1 overall.
Let me preface this by saying this before I give you my answer, Tommy and DK. The answer I'm about to give is not an indictment on Caleb Williams. But DK knows this. Our producer Noah knows this. Tell me you know this. I had Jaden Daniels as my #1 guy coming into the draft. So from that standpoint, I would have taken Jaden Daniels #1 either way. And I'm not changing that answer today. I would have taken Jaden Daniels #1 overall. But Caleb Williams, when you talk about everything that you talked about, DK, yes, he hasn't thrown any interceptions over the last 9 games, but he's also held the ball entirely too long, and he's taken too many sacks and too many hits. The one thing I will say is I've loved how he's competed. Even though his offense has been maligned, his receivers have dropped balls. They've had a lack of a running game. Caleb Williams still goes out there and competes, right? So from that standpoint, he would have been my 2nd overall pick. But Jaden Daniels, you see it right there, the comparison, the completion percentage. And you just go back to last week, Tommy and DK. He's just unconscious. He's never fazed by the moment, right? Being down in that game, 5 turnovers on offense, for him to lead that Commanders team versus the Eagles defense that have been one of the best, if not the best in the league, come from behind and win. I think the biggest play in that game was with 3 minutes left, he throws an ill-advised throw on second down and turns it over, and the game could have been over. If Devontae Smith catches a slant pass, game is most likely over. But for him to be able to still have the poise to come back and lead his team to victory shows you the mentality that Jaden Daniels has. So, again, this isn't an indictment on Caleb Williams because he's playing like a typical rookie. You're going to have some ups and downs, right? You're going to have good moments. You're going to have bad moments. There's going to be times you don't process as well or you take sacks. But Jaden Daniels has been out of this world, and I saw that at LSU, and that's why I had him as my #1 quarterback on draft boards.
So for Caleb Williams, he's already been going under a new head coaching change going into his sophomore season. Guys, there's an ESPN report out there that Super Bowl winning head coach is interested in joining him. Pete Carroll, Dews. What do we think about the potential matchup there in the Windy City?
I think there's no way the Chicago Bears don't hire somebody that's offensive-minded just because you have Caleb Williams there. DK already spoke to it, right? It's been malpractice when it comes to essentially keeping coaches past the tenure that you should keep them when you're going to draft the quarterback in the first round. And usually you want to marry the head coach with the franchise quarterback and the GM. And it seems like Chicago just refuses. And again, I'm never, happy about somebody losing their job. But anytime you're going to get a quarterback in the first round and you've struggled the last few years, sometimes it's better just to rip the Band-Aid off and start anew, start fresh. But we've seen it multiple times, whether it's Mitch Trubisky, whether it's Justin Fields, and now Caleb Williams. That coach usually gets fired after the rookie year of the quarterback, and now the quarterback has to learn a whole new system. So I'm not sure that Pete Carroll will be a good fit. We've seen, he's a defensive-minded coach, but we've seen the quarterbacks really elevate under him when he was with Seattle. When you talk about Russell Wilson and you talk about Gino Smith, but I think there's no way, DK, that they don't hire somebody that's offensive-minded because Caleb Williams is there.
The only thing I would push back against that is look at Jaden Daniels. Dan Quinn is not an offensive mind, but they went out and got an incredible coordinator in Cliff Kingsbury. Like, that to me is the most important decision the Chicago Bears will make. Not necessarily who the head coach is going to be, but who is running the offense, who's installing the scheme, who is mentoring Caleb Williams on a day-in, day-out basis. So, from Pete Carroll's standpoint, I know there's a lot of contention about how true or not this report is. I don't really believe it. But they do need somebody, much like Dan Campbell has in Detroit, to establish a culture. Because this culture has been broken, it feels like, for 2 decades, where they just can't get out of their own way and they don't find ways to win. And they don't have somebody that's a true leader. So that, to me, is what they're looking for. And that's where I think kind of the Pete Carroll, who is a culture builder, makes sense and why it becomes believable. But at this stage in his career, I don't believe it. I don't think it's a good fit now. But that doesn't mean somebody else, and maybe even, Ben Johnson, who's in Detroit, who's been under that culture, might be a good fit. Maybe Mike Vrabel is somebody who can build that culture up. I don't think you go necessarily find an offensive mind because you have to. You have to find somebody that's going to build that culture back to where it needs to be. And then that next hire becomes that much more important of who's going to be mentoring and running the offense for Caleb Williams.
Again, getting back to Pete's old team in Seattle, Danny, here, unlikely that the Seahawks are going to make it to the postseason. How much do you think Gino Smith's future, who's got 1 year left on his deal, is tied to the success or failure from the Seahawks this season?
How much is he willing to work out, negotiate? I mean, how much is he willing to potentially rework a deal that, keeps him maybe through 26, because he's already 34 years old. He's going to turn 35. If he's willing to rework a contract and, do an extension that is very manageable, where he's not going to break the bank and probably somewhere similar around the numbers where he's making now at $25 million for an average annual value, I think it's pretty good for somebody who's been consistent. The floor for what Gino's going to be, which is going to give you a chance to win. And if your defense gets better, if you put some talent around him, he can absolutely take you on a playoff run. And then when you rework that contract, give yourself a couple years, then you can start looking to the future, maybe bring in a quarterback that has a year to sit out and to take a breath and to watch somebody who's been one of the best pros. When you hear that term, I think Gino Smith is the perfect example of somebody who knows what it's like to be an NFL franchise quarterback. And that could be a great situation for a young quarterback to go in and watch a true veteran who's had a lot of success, but knows more importantly what it means to be a pro. I think that's the best case scenario for the Seahawks.
Yeah, without a doubt. He should at least get a 1-year extension. Maybe we work something. Because when you look at it, Tommy and DK, what are their other options? They're not going to be high enough in the draft to potentially get a quarterback of the future, right? And Gino has literally had them in the playoffs or in playoff contention in all 3 years he's been the starter. So the one thing he has struggled with is red zone interceptions this year. Now, DK, we know that not all interceptions are on the quarterback. Some things have been the receiver not being on the same page, depending on the zone look and not being out of place, because nobody makes more big-time throws than Gino Smith. And it's because he can process and he knows what coverage you're in, and he's throwing to a spot, and he expects his receivers to be there. And that's why Jackson Smith-Njigba has really taken off these last few weeks and essentially become the #1 receiver. So if you're the Seahawks brass, like, what is your other option besides having Gino stay there for at least minimum the next 2 years? You're not going to be high enough in the draft to take a franchise quarterback of the future. I think they do need to give him at least a 1-year extension this year. That way he's in the team and in the locker room until that 2026 season and until the end of it.
All right, let's wrap up this segment. Who wins, and more importantly, gents, who covers? Douz, then DK.
Yeah, I'm taking the Seahawks -3.5. Just have way more to play for. Just finished watching that Chicago and Lions film before we came on air, and too many coverage busts from that Chicago defense. It seems like a lot of those guys may have packed it up already. Also, the offensive line woes. It looks like Tevin Jenkins and Braxton Jones, who had ankle surgery, is going to be out this game. We've already talked about how the offensive line has been inept, and Caleb at times has run for his life. Look for that Seattle Seahawks defensive line to get after him. Zach Charbonnet has a big game. Give me the Seahawks -3.5.
I'm going to go with the Bears as the home team getting 3.5 points. I'll take those points. Maybe the Seahawks win, but I think it's sort of a lower scoring affair as well. So I'll take the Bears and the under, Tommy.
Okay. DK, Douz, certainly appreciate it. Best of luck to all of our bettors here on Thursday Night Football. A reminder about CBS Sports HQ. News, highlights of the Thursday Night Football game and every Week 17 game on the slate, and scores. It's all here, and it's all free.